So you've probably heard of Catholics, Orthodox Christians, and Protestants. They're all part of Christianity, the world's biggest religion, but it's not just one big uniform group. It's more like a family with three really distinct branches. Today, we're going to dig into how they got that way and what really truly sets them apart. But before we dive into the differences, it's absolutely crucial to remember what they all share. At the end of the day, all three traditions are built on the same foundation: belief in one God, the divinity of Jesus, the resurrection, the core stuff. For the first 1,000 years, they were all basically part of the same tree. Which leads to the big question, right? If they all started in the same place, how on earth did this one faith split into three massive global families? Well, the answer is a wild ride of politics, culture, and of course some really deep disagreements about theology. I mean, just try to picture it. For the first millennium, Christianity was more or less a single church. Sure, it was diverse, with different centers of power and culture, but it saw itself as one body, one faith. That unity, though, was about to face its first real test, a big one. And here it is, the first major break. It all went down, officially at least, in the year 1054. It's called the Great Schism, and it cracked the Christian world right down the middle, creating a Latin-speaking West with its heart in Rome and a Greek-speaking East, centered in the great city of Constantinople. Now, this split wasn't a surprise. It didn't just happen overnight. It was more like a slow-motion car crash over hundreds of years. You had political shifts, like the collapse of the Roman Empire in the West, which left a power vacuum. You had language barriers, Latin versus Greek. The formal break in 1054 with mutual excommunications was kind of the point of no return. But the real nail in the coffin, that was in 1204, when Western Crusaders actually sacked Constantinople. That pretty much sealed the deal. So if you boil it all down, what was the fight really about? In a word, power. The Church in the West, in Rome, believed the Pope was the supreme boss of all Christians everywhere. But the East, they just didn't see it that way. To them, the Pope was the first among equals. Sure, an honored position, but he had no business telling their churches what to do. Okay, so the church is split in two. Now let's fast forward almost 500 years. The Western Church, what we now call the Roman Catholic Church, is about to face its own massive internal earthquake. This was the Protestant Reformation, and it was about to completely shatter the religious map of Europe. And at the center of this storm was a German monk named Martin Luther. He came forward with two ideas that were, frankly, revolutionary. First, sola fide, which is just Latin for faith alone. He argued that you couldn't earn your way into heaven. It was a free gift from God you received through faith. And second, sola scriptura, or scripture alone. This was a direct challenge, saying the Bible was the one and only ultimate authority, even above the Pope. But Luther just lit the match. The Reformation wasn't one single thing. It sparked different movements all over Europe. You had Lutheranism taking root in Germany, another version led by John Calvin popping up in Switzerland, and then in England, King Henry VIII started his own church, which, let's be honest, was more about politics and his marital problems than theology. Okay, so now we have our three big families: Catholic, Orthodox, and the brand new Protestant branch. Let's really get into one of the biggest, most practical differences between them. Their blueprints for who's actually in charge, who gets the final say. Let's break it down. The Catholic Church is easy to picture. It's a pyramid. It's very hierarchical, super centralized, with the Pope sitting right at the top. The Orthodox Church, on the other hand, is more like a commonwealth of self-governing churches, all united in faith, but making decisions in councils. And Protestantism? That's the wild card. It's everything from denominations with bishops to tiny, completely independent local churches. It's all over the map. Now, to really understand that unique power of the Pope, you have to get this one key idea: papal infallibility. This doesn't mean Catholics believe the Pope is perfect or can't make a mistake. It's a very specific doctrine that says when he speaks officially, they call it ex cathedra, on a core matter of faith or morals, he's protected from error. That makes his word the final binding authority. The Orthodox model is pretty much the total opposite. It's built on two big ideas. The first is autocephaly, which literally just means self-headed. The Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, they run themselves. And big decisions aren't made by one guy, they're made through conciliarity. That's a fancy way of saying councils of bishops get together and have to hash things out to reach a consensus. But look, these aren't just abstract diagrams of who's in charge. These differences have a huge impact on the real-world experience of faith. So let's ask the question, how does what you believe change how you actually worship? Remember Martin Luther and sola scriptura? For Protestants, that's a cornerstone. The Bible is the one and only foolproof source of truth. But for Catholics and the Orthodox, it's more like a two-legged stool. Scripture's one leg, absolutely. But the other is what they call holy tradition. All the teachings, counsels, and ways of worship passed down through the centuries. They believe you need both. And get this, that disagreement over tradition literally changes the table of contents in their Bibles. No joke. Protestant Bibles have 66 books, but Catholic Bibles have 73, and Orthodox Bibles have even more. They include extra books from an ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament that the Protestants set aside, but that they consider to be inspired scripture. All right, let's talk sacraments. For Catholics and Orthodox Christians, the number to remember is 7. They believe these sacred rituals, like baptism, confirmation, the Eucharist, are real, tangible channels of God's grace to people. But for most Protestants, that number drops all the way down to 2, just baptism and communion. So why the big difference? Well, it goes right back to that sola scriptura idea. The Reformers said, hey, these are the only 2 that Jesus himself explicitly told us to do in the Gospels. Now this next one, the Eucharist or communion, is one of the most significant and deeply felt divides. Catholics believe in transubstantiation. That's the idea that the bread and wine, while they still look and taste the same, actually become the literal body and blood of Christ. The Orthodox also believe in this real presence, but they prefer to just call it a holy mystery and not over-explain it. And Protestants? Well, their views range all the way from a spiritual presence to seeing it as a purely symbolic memorial. And the differences get down to very practical, everyday rules, like for the clergy. In the Catholic Church, priests have to be celibate, period. In the Orthodox Church, there's a fascinating rule. A man can be married before he becomes a priest, but he can't get married after. And in most Protestant churches, pastors are not only free to marry, they're often encouraged to. So we've traced the history, we've unpacked the theology. Now let's zoom all the way out and see what this global Christian tapestry actually looks like today. So when you just look at the raw numbers, Catholicism is by far the biggest single slice of the pie, with well over 1 billion people. Protestantism, if you add up all its thousands of denominations, is the next biggest chunk, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, while smaller, represents this incredibly ancient and deep tradition. It's also fascinating to see where these traditions are strongest today. The country with the most Catholics isn't Italy, it's Brazil, thanks to its colonial history. The heartland of Orthodoxy is still very much Eastern Europe, especially Russia. And for Protestantism, with its incredible diversity, the biggest population is right here in the United States. So after 2,000 years, you're left with these 3 great rivers, all flowing from a single ancient spring. They're separated by some deep canyons of history and theology, but they're still connected at the source. And it leaves you with this one huge, lingering question. Will these paths ever start to draw closer together? Or are new fractures just going to keep shaping the future of this faith? It's something to think about.